a special pleasure to introduce Geev Patel, who is, as many of you know, a polymath. And many of us, I think, in these troubled times have a hybrid artistic practice. And Geev has been very active as a poet, as a playwright, and as a visual artist, a painter. And in all of these various practices, he's achieved very, very distinctive benchmarks. He's had 3 volumes of poetry, Poems 1966, How Do You Withstand Body, which emerged in the celebrated moment of the Clearinghouse movement, and Mirrored Mirroring. As a playwright, again, he's explored the inner world of the Parsi community, especially in Bombay and on the West Coast, and how that ripples out into a larger world of relationships and crises. And as an artist, which is the role in which we meet him today, he's had, he can look back on 40 years, what would it be, 4 decades of continuous activity and an engagement with the question of how to represent the human figure in its social and political complexities. And really, without saying more, I would now like to invite you, Geev, to present your work, and then we talk about it after the images.
I'm going to start by showing you some images from my 2011 New York show. The show is called Clouds, Skulls, Wells, and it just literally shows those. I've been quite fascinated by clouds for many years and have thought a great deal about how they could be portrayed in non-cliched ways. You know, normally clouds are portrayed as a jumbled mass, and so I thought that I'd do exactly the opposite and try and portray them line by line. So they're discrete. They're made up of discrete lines. You'll see them shortly. And that took me on to an insight that clouds have no permanent form. They are constantly forming and they are constantly dissolving, both at the same time. And this is a challenge and a moment of great joy for me, this discovery. And so these drawings. I'm sorry, at this time of day one can't have total darkness, but I think you'll get some idea. Okay. They are in pencil, some of them are in pencil on paper, the others are ink on paper. Skulls. These are charcoal drawings on paper. Not much to say about them. You can have a look. Bit of a blurred picture, but anyway. Looking into a well is a theme I've been for some decades now, a couple of decades at least. A boyhood experience of looking in and being fascinated by the reflection on the water, the size of the well, what's outside the well. And these paintings take all these things together and try and reflection on the water, the size of the well, what's outside the well. And these paintings take all these things together and try and give you an expression of that. So these 3 wells in this particular show are the largest I've done. They were 8 feet by 8 feet each, pretty large.
Can we have
The other,
excuse me? Yeah.
the other one. Thank you. I'll do a quick slideshow again. These are images taken from the body of my work, not chronological, but in order to give some structure to the sequence, I have divided them into 3 sections. One is the section of the well, looking into a well, which I might broadly call, I could call them celebratory works. Then there are paintings about violent deaths. This is something that should concern all of us, but concerns me perhaps a little more because through 35 years of my life, I was a practicing medical practitioner. I might have done these paintings even had I not been a medical practitioner. But being a practitioner did, I expect, in some way affect these works. And the third body of works is what you might call the everyday life on the Indian street. So let me just show them to you. There are a few wells, and then we get on to the rest. That's an example of the violent death. And that's an example of, what you might call normal life. A man stringing a musical instrument in a field. That's the letter home. A laborer from Andhra Pradesh in Bombay City dictating a letter because he's illiterate to a scribe. That's a detail. Gateway, Bombay again. 2 street people and the drama of the distance between the two. That's a madman in the street. It was renamed by a painter friend of mine. He called it the Swaying Saint. Mourning woman. That's off Lamington Road. It's probably the largest number of human and animal figures I've put together in one painting. So it took me about 3 years to finish this work. There are some details. That's called Riot, and there's some ambiguity in my mind whether the boy is being consigned to the fire or whether he's being rescued from the fire. That's a figure in landscape. Porter from Bombay Central with a ghat background. That's woman buying vegetables. Two men with hand cart. Early guest. That's death of a singer or performer. And middle class woman who probably organized the festival between the two of them. I memorialized a moment when three kinds of women from our society are seen together in that close proximity. There will be no other occasion for them ever to have this proximity. That's called congratulations. I did a set of paintings on the railway platform around the local stations of Bombay. I removed human beings, and so I was perpetually asked, how can you do a Bombay local station without human beings? I said, well, that's the only way then, that you could think of the poetry of the architecture and of the surrounding scrub fields. That's from the same set. Wells, a few wells. Many people seeing these paintings have remarked that they are not sure that they are looking into a well, that they could be at the bottom of the well looking up. And I'm not displeased with this ambiguity. They're large, they're 6 feet by 6 feet. That's a midnight well with a moon reflector. And a few images of violent death. This is the drowned woman. I'm sorry? I'm afraid I have not given that much thought. But she's drowned all right. That's a battered body in a landscape. It's the detail from the same painting. It's a crushed head. And crows. And one more of crows feasting on a dead rodent. One-eyed woman. I did a set of paintings, the painting which I did with off Lamington Road, with large numbers of people in that painting. Then I did alongside with that several paintings which had just one figure per painting, and these are small works. So it was a kind of a way of telling myself that I have to portray human beings in a crowd, but that they also deserve an individual space, each to his own. So motor mechanic. It's an aging eunuch. This one is called Peacock at Nariman Point. It's a rare moment in Bombay when a peacock from Malabar Hill overnight walked to the high-rise buildings at Nariman Point and was clipped there. So I thought I would memorialize the moment. That's the water tank at Nargur. The boy washing buffaloes. I was at Marine Drive. Somebody said to me, why do they look so sad? I said, Lavas always look sad. At least much of the time. Girl. I was interested in her It's a schoolgirl, you know, a girl from one of Bombay municipal schools, and she's turning around to look at you. And I was interested in the toughness of this little child who has hardly any flesh on her bones against the tall building in the background and the desolation of an empty pavement. Man in the Rain with Bread and Bananas. This is again a theme which I have worked on. There are 2 or 3 versions. I was interested in a man clutching on to his day's supply of food, caught in a heavy August monsoon shower in Bombay, when it looks like the rain is going to ruin his meal. So he's protecting himself. There's another version. That's another version. That's early morning local. The local trains in Bombay, for me are a great romance. But you have to be careful what time of day you get into them. Avoid rush hour. Pardon? Well, early morning is still okay. 5 o'clock in the morning you'll find this. It's quite wonderful. That's why he's dozing. Thank you.
Steve, thank you for taking us through these 40 years of work. Just to place your work in a historical context for people who might not yet be familiar with it, you were part of this phalanx of young artists who emerged on the scene in the late 60s and early 70s with a very definite program of overcoming what you saw to be the tendency towards abstraction and more transcendental concerns. So for you, the local, the here and now, the immediate, the life that was around you, all these were very important as concerns. But in your work, it's very interesting, you did show it chronologically, but it's amazing that on the one hand, there's this, in your own work, there's this move away from the life of the street towards increasing abstraction, through the wells, through this reflection on more cosmic concerns, towards the clouds and what happens there, where form itself dissolves. But you never lose the sense of place and being in place, and engaged with a place. Do you want to talk about this a little bit? These two?
Sure. Yeah. Around the 60s is when late 50s, early 60s, when I first started painting. The people I admired greatly were people like Akbar Padamsi, Tayab Mehta, and they were engaged in doing the human figure. But this was a human figure which was not located in a specific time and place. It is a timeless figure, and and therefore it had a tremendous sense of authority and permanence, and I was greatly drawn to this. But as I started painting, I came in touch with other painters, young painters from Baroda, Ghulam Ahmad Sheikh, Bhupen Thakkar, and also with the poet and critic Nissim Ezekiel. And from these sources, I got a sense that it might be interesting to explore the here and the now. Human beings as we see them day after day, and their problems, and how do you depict that, and how do you infuse that with a sense of grace and permanence. And so that is a task that I took on along with a few other painters of my generation. But I think that I never, some of these painters, completely disowned the generation of Akbar Padamsi and Tayab Mehta as, something that's passé. Whereas I never really lost my taste for these works. And so, in my handling of the paint, and in my return to some themes which one might call dangerous word, transcendental.
Speak without fear, Geef.
The clouds, the wells, I think that I'm approaching there an area which might have found approval from Akbar and Tayyab, or more approval than for the other works.
But you never lose sight.
And Akbar was my mentor, he was my teacher, so that connection was never lost.
No, but it strikes me, as you were speaking of the authoritative body, like in Akbar's work, it's always the prophet, the regal, splendid figure with the aura of elsewhere. But in your work, the body is always vulnerable, it's mutilated, it's maimed often. And through the 80s, you had this unfolding set of paintings that you used to call the Gallery of Man. Wasn't it? Oh,
Yes.
Right? The crushed, the smashed head, the crushed head.
Yes, but also normal heads.
Right.
Yeah.
But that intrigues me because that concern with the wound and woundedness is something that you find in all your other work as well. I remember in your play Savaksa, for instance, the protagonist has this itch and this
an eczema
that is actually like a protagonist in the play.
Right.
And also in your poetry, you've recurred to this idea of the body that tries to hold its contents in against a world that is hostile and destructive. So,
yeah. I think I think death, mutilation, destruction, maybe it was something that came on me in a big way in the 70s when I was in my 30s. And I think it was the first time in my life that that I was facing destruction on a scale, destruction directed towards the human body on a scale which I never experienced before, because there was Vietnam, there were the riots in our country, there was the Shah of Iran and what he was doing to the country, and these newspaper reports, which as you grow older, you tend to get used to them, and they kind of it's water off a duck's back, unfortunately. But when you're 30, it really hits you, and I think that these paintings of damage to the human body were an attempt to get to terms with violence directed towards the human body. Something that all of us have to take account of.
So I recall that you wrote a very moving poem on the students who were massacred at Dhaka University at some point in the early 70s.
It was shortly after the massacre, yes.
So again, there's a sense of moving outside of oneself and one's own local predicament to embrace what is going on elsewhere, across one's borders. So would you say that you were part of a sort of internationalist sort of zeitgeist in the late 60s and early 70s? How important were the student movements of the late 60s to you in your particular location in Bombay?
Probably not too important for me, Ranjit, except as something that I was reading in the papers. I was never an activist. Because I'm in a brief Marxist phase, Everyone goes through a brief Marxist phase. Every decent human being goes through it. Yeah.
Just to say that since we began about 5 minutes late, we will continue about this slot.
Yeah. So maybe that was maybe that brief moment of when I felt that I could be actively engaged in student movements or in artist movements, but it was a very brief flirtation, let's say. What was more permanent was the concern, and I felt that it is my sadhana, if you like, to keep this concern within me and to talk about it through writing and painting. And in the 70s there was a lot of guff floating around too. a lot of Marxist guff. There are artists who are saying, why should one paint when the world is in this state? It's your duty to take up arms or whatever, or do this or do that. I was never tempted to join this kind of stuff. And happily for me, I was always convinced that continuing to paint and write is a very, very important thing in the worst of times.
That would have been an amazing line to go out on, Keith, because it reminds us that, as I wrote in my introduction to Dom Murray's selected poems, they also serve who only sit and write. But I want to return to you, because in those years, you did make an important decision to leave the metropolis and devote yourself to working as a medical practitioner in the villages of Gujarat.
This was a little earlier, very early in my career. This would have been 69, 70.
Yes,
before this whole body of work happened.
Do you want to talk
it was a very short, it was about a year or a year and a half in the rural part of Gujarat, which is a state that my parents come from, and I went back to that area because I was very, very attached to that part of the country, and I knew the people, and I worked there as a doctor, but I realized that I had to come back to the metropolis. I think that the metropolis, it gives, I think there are possibly two kinds of artists, artists who can isolate themselves from the great movements of the city and continue to work, quietly in some remote corner, and others who need the conflicts of the city around them, and I'm among the latter. I need it. Although I create a little secluded space for myself in my studio in the city. It's a very, very quiet part of Bombay. In fact, once you enter my studio and look out of the window, you can't believe it's Bombay. It's that quiet and beautiful. So I have made that little nest for myself. But I like to get out of that studio as well and to travel in the local trains. Not during Russia.
So I think we have about 3 minutes for questions from the floor. So if anyone has questions or observations that they want to address to give.
Questions?
I had two reactions to that. One of them I think you partially answered. You also spoke about it. About your tendency to memorialize a certain moment, very much like the Impressionist did, but your way seems quite different from the early Impressionist. You're not concerned with surface structures. Secondly, looking at the Cloud series, there seems to be a tendency to reduce clutter. You essentially, a lot of your situations are really like with a lot of clutter, crowds and everything. And what you come out with the expression, your interpretation of that, is that you seem to be choosing your focus and just removing the clutter. Would you?
Thank you. That was a wonderful observation. Both very fine observations. Thank you. It's true. As I said, I did the local railway platforms without a single human being. In Bombay, it's unthinkable.
It's a special effect.
It's a special effect. I think that there's this little distance, between life and art. Art allows you to choose. Life doesn't give you many choices. You have to go with it. So I exercise that sense of choice, and I think that temperamentally I'm the kind of person who likes clarity of thought, of being, and I like to take away things which interfere with this clarity, and so that might, even in my writing, I weed out things, and I think that helps me to arrive at an essential moment.
Two quick questions. First of all, as a doctor, Obviously you have familiarity with the body, the bodies of patients and so on. And it seems to me, although you mentioned that the origin of some of those smashed heads and so on come from more images maybe from the media and so on. But I wonder if that anatomical eye of the doctor is as much at work in the creation of these images. The second question relates to your series of wells, which are rather marvelous conceptual pieces, and they, I'd like to linger on them again. I can't remember, I apologize for missing your earlier shots, but do you feel more comfortable now with that dangerous word, transcendentalism?
Well, your first question, sorry, Chris, will you repeat that?
About being a doctor.
Yes. The violent deaths, what things I've seen in the morgue, I've seen in books of forensic medicine. But the moment I start painting, the imagination also comes into play. And so, if I'm doing the foam that emerges from the mouth of the drowning woman, I'm spending 20 minutes giving little stipples of white around the corner of her mouth. And there's an incredible sense of delight in doing this. So, it's an extremely complex moment where all your forces are working together. The forces of fear, the forces of disgust, and the forces of delight. And this is what art can give you. And your second question?
Are you more comfortable with that word,
transcendental? I'm okay with it. But I think that one has to tread carefully. I think that I'm rather happy that each of these wells has specific physical locations, There's a stone there, there's water there reflecting the sky, there are plants. So however transcendental, it is anchored in our world. Similarly, the clouds, which I think you didn't see those because they were the first things I showed, which are just linear and they form and dissolve, and which is the farthest that one could possibly think of as being transcendental, or maybe not. But to me, it's important that they are clouds, and they are not mere abstract forms. Not that I have any quarrel with abstract painting. I love it. And some of the great abstract masters, I take lessons from their work. Thank you very much.